everybody. Welcome back to my series ranking and reviewing every Genesis song. We started at number 179, and today we're going to pick back up at number 119. If you haven't already watched the whole series, I'll try to remember to put a link to the playlist right about now. I'm Hans from Electric Brain, Electric Shadow. We are a contemporary art rock project. If you like Genesis, particularly the older stuff, check us out on Bandcamp or your preferred music streaming platform. This is one of the more underrated songs from We Can't Dance. The drumming is based around kind of a brushed, jazzy feel, which is, from a drumming standpoint, I think a pretty different vibe from most of the rest of the catalog. It summons up a nice dark atmosphere, and there's a pretty good keyboard solo on the outro that moves through a few different moods. This feels like a long song, but it's actually under 6 minutes. I think part of the way that they achieve that economy is by not going back to the chorus after the closing keyboard solo, which is the kind of economical thinking that We Can't Dance maybe could have used a bit more of. I also really like the vocal harmony in the backing vocals on the chorus, which has a little bit of an eerie quality to it. Kind of reminds me a bit of Alice in Chains, although I can't really make a good kind of music theory case for why that is. The song has a nicely atmospheric intro. There's some neat details in the arrangement. You know, Rutherford was still finding himself as a guitarist, I think, here, but he does add some really effective touches. I especially like the switch between the kind of very swinging, rhythmically loose, you might call it A section, and then the very kind of straightforward stomp of the B section. It's a rhythmic dynamic that is very satisfying. Lyrically, though, the story that they're telling is kind of pointless, and it's not one of the more melodic songs on And Then There Were Three. This is the most powerful song on Calling All Stations. It's the highest rated one, probably ultimately proof that the proggier aspects of this album were the most effective. There's almost a hint of like EDM in some of the keyboard tones and styles. They sound really different from a lot of the other stuff that Tony ever really did. The guitars, you know, maybe they're kind of produced and mixed so that they don't have the punch of a lot of heavy rock from that period. You know, they run into the issue that a lot of bands from this 70s bands in this era did, where they kind of they're trying to be heavy, but they're outclassed a little bit by their times. That being said, though, you know, the guitars do give kind of a nice sense of soaring. They do hit where they need to. And the drums are particularly effective here. You know, when a lot of people try to dissect why this album wasn't as successful as it could have been artistically, one common criticism is that it needed another writer or arranger to kind of serve as a bridge between Tony's ideas and Mike's. And the drummer, Nerzid Kyahu, actually here is allowed to serve that role in a way that either he wasn't allowed to or didn't choose to, or, you know, for whatever reason didn't in a lot of the rest of the album. His drumming is actually a major instrumental voice. It's key to the arrangement, and the song, I don't think, really would exist in anything like the form that it does without the role he has as an instrumental voice. So, you know, I mean, I think the success of this song, with space being given to another player in a way that isn't mostly on a lot of the rest of the album, or, you know, where the third player is succeeding in a way that he didn't on the rest of the album. I think the fact that this song is so successful with that additional voice having such space really does back that theory up as to maybe why the overall album didn't do as well as it could have. It even ends on a hard stop instead of a fade out, which gives the whole song a sense of fullness and completion that the endless fade outs on the rest of the album don't have. In fact, I'd say this is maybe the only song on Calling All Stations that basically has no identifiable flaws. This is another one of those transitional pieces from Lamb, which is kind of hard to rate out of context, although it does work better as an isolated piece than Ravine. The main riff evokes a placid mood, and this is maybe my favorite use of the choral setting on Tony's Mellotron. You could make this 20 minutes long, and it would be a really good Popol Vuh song. 3 minutes is fine too, though. So, out of everything on Trespass, this feels the most like a holdover from the first album. You know, you've got maybe a piano hook that's a little overly obvious. You have an unusually simple chorus and a straightforward structure relative to a lot of the rest of that album. And you have a bleak lyric that's kind of hinting at some bigger story that's not quite told. Now, the song does have room to sprawl and breathe and elaborate itself in a way that a lot of the first album stuff didn't. So, in that regard, it's a bit more characteristic of Trespass. And it does summon up a certain amount of menace and mystery, but not nearly so much of those qualities as a lot of the other work from this period. I do like having it in the flow of Trespass, right? Where it helps to have something a little less dense, a little bit more chorus oriented and conventionally structured. It's good for the pacing of that album. Taken on its own, though, you know, there are a lot of much better songs from the classic period. Phil is so sweet and vulnerable here that this song is fairly beloved, even though it's basically arranged like a demo. Selling England is so full of long, overly complex pieces that it is nice to have something that provides a bit of a breather, and it's a moving song, even if maybe it does overstay its welcome by about a minute and a half. Now, this is, of course, famously the first lead vocal by Phil. It's a wonderful little interlude piece about some old ladies on a Sunday. Even though in some ways it's more grounded in its subject matter, I actually find this song to be just as otherworldly as anything else on Nursery Crime, in the sense that it still does reflect a place, a way of life that was totally, completely alien, not just to anything else in 70s rock music, but certainly to me as an American teenager in the 90s when I first encountered it. And I would say, actually, I'll go so far personally as to say, you know, the delicacy of this song, the quietude of it, it's really actually a wonderful piece, even if it's wonderful in a very compact and restrained way that maybe doesn't lend itself to placing as high on this list as things that are a bit larger. The moods here are excellent. You know, I love the dreaminess of that backwards sample on the opening. The joy of the chorus, which is small and restrained, but intense in a very mild way. And I really appreciate how the joyfulness of that chorus plays off against the equally quiet despair of the verse. And the rhythm section has kind of a quiet, sad funkiness, if that's not paradoxical. It's maybe a bit unusual to hear something so syncopated, so like kind of rhythmically interesting, while still fundamentally being so kind of muted and sad at the same time. I would say that this might rank a bit higher if not for the coda, which is maybe a little too obvious, right? It's a little too much of like an overly literal restatement of the theme, where something more ambiguous might have been a better way to go out. And sonically, the electric piano on the coda doesn't quite have the creativity of the rest of the song. But that's the difference between what might have been a really world-class song and still a very, very overall good one. So this song has some nice layering and interplay between acoustic guitars, has some very pretty flute interludes, but it's arranged so that it just keeps stopping and starting in ways that do sabotage momentum a bit. And it feels a bit like different ideas fighting against each other. I'm also not sure what to say about the lyric, which, you know, it's such a weird story, right? The whole thing about the king of the wolves. It makes less and less sense the more questions that you ask about it. You know, are these literal wolves? If so, how did they get a scepter and crown? How does a wolf raise a scepter to deal a deadly blow? Does it hold a scepter with its paw? It's silly, in a way that even the Genesis to Revelation stuff is not. And you can't imagine them singing anything like this with a straight face, even on the next album. So I'm going to say something a little pretentious here, which is that this song achieves a kind of paradoxical anti-experimentalism, where the choice to do something so minimal is in fact a kind of daring, kind of its own experiment. You can imagine them writing something like this before 1981, but inevitably it would have bulked up and metastasized in the process of rehearsal. In this case, they've allowed the production to fill in the gaps in the arrangement, and the result is a nice kind of pop rock ballad. It's very well served by the big drum sound and by the way that Phil's vocal delivery is loose and passionate in a way that it wouldn't have been before. Still, though, after the first couple minutes, it does begin to feel like maybe they've leaned a bit too hard into repetition, right? That one more verse or another part or some kind of a change up, a solo, a middle eight, might have propelled this from being a really pretty good song into an all-star piece. All right, thanks much, everybody, for your time and attention. I'll see you in a couple weeks when we'll resume counting from number 109.